first segment. President Obama concluded an international summit on nuclear security in Washington, D.C. Tuesday after securing pledges from dozens of nations to eliminate or safeguard all vulnerable nuclear materials within 4 years. The final statement from the 47-nation summit agreed on a voluntary action plan to combat nuclear terrorism and promised greater efforts to block non-state actors from obtaining the building blocks for nuclear weapons. In his closing remarks Tuesday, President Obama called for a, quote, bold and pragmatic effort and highlighted the, quote, urgency and seriousness of the threat posed by nuclear terrorism.
Today we are declaring that nuclear terrorism is one of the most challenging threats to international security. We also agreed that the most effective way to prevent terrorists and criminals from acquiring nuclear materials is through strong nuclear security, protecting nuclear materials and preventing nuclear smuggling.
The two-day meeting is the largest international gathering hosted by an American administration since 1945. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu decided not to attend at the last minute, and Iran, Syria, and North Korea were not invited to the summit.
For more on the Nuclear Security Summit, we're joined by John Mueller, professor of political science at Ohio State University. He's the author of Atomic Obsession, Nuclear Alarmism from Hiroshima to Al-Qaeda, and the book Overblown, How Politicians and the Terrorism Industry Inflate National Security Threats and Why We Believe Them. He joins us from Columbus, Ohio. We welcome you to Democracy Now! Professor, lay out your criticism of what took place, this largest gathering of world leaders held by the United States since FDR.
Well, much of it, I think, is fine. Locking up fissile material, the uranium and plutonium, is certainly a worthy objective. And
well, I want to turn to what President Obama had to say at yesterday's news conference when he was asked about Israel's nuclear program. He was questioned by Scott Wilson of The Washington Post.
You have spoken often about the need to bring U.S. policy in line with its treaty obligations internationally to eliminate the perception of hypocrisy that some of the world sees toward the United States and its allies. In that spirit and in that venue, will you call on Israel to declare its nuclear program and sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty? And if not, why wouldn't other countries see that as an incentive not to sign on to the treaty that you say is important to strengthen?
Well, Scott, initially we were talking about U.S. behavior, and then suddenly we were talking about Israel. Let me talk about the United States. I do think that as part of the NPT, our obligation as the largest nuclear power in the world is to take steps to reducing our nuclear stockpile. And that's what the START Treaty was about, sending a message that we are going to meet our obligations. As far as Israel goes, I'm not going to comment on their program. What I'm going to point to is the fact that consistently we have urged all countries to become members of the NPT. So there's no contradiction there.
That was President Obama speaking yesterday at the news conference. Well, last year, veteran White House correspondent Helen Thomas pressed Obama on nuclear weapons in the Middle East in a clear reference to Israel. The president tried to ignore that part of her question.
Mr. President, do you think that Pakistan and are maintaining the safe havens in Afghanistan for these so-called terrorists? And also, do you know of any country in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons?
Well, I think that Pakistan, there is no doubt that in the Fatah region of Pakistan, in the mountainous regions along the border of Afghanistan, that there are safe havens where terrorists are operating. And one of the goals of Ambassador Holbrooke, as he is traveling throughout the region, is to deliver a message to Pakistan that they are endangered as much as we are by the continuation of those operations, and that we've got to work in a regional fashion to root out those safe havens. With respect to nuclear weapons, I don't want to speculate. What I know is this, that if we see a nuclear arms race in a region as volatile as the Middle East, everybody will be in danger. And one of my goals is to prevent nuclear proliferation generally. I think that it's important for the United States, in concert with Russia, to lead the way on this.
Well, in addition to John Mueller, we're also joined from Washington, D.C. by author and activist John Steinbach, who just wrote a paper on Israel's nuclear weapons program published by the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research. Welcome to Democracy Now!, John Steinbach. Can you talk about what President Obama has said in those two clips we just played and your paper on Israel's nuclear weapons program?
Yes, good morning. Well, we need to go all the way back to the early 1970s when it became obvious that Israel had a nuclear weapons program, and in fact, by then had perhaps a dozen nuclear weapons. It became a difficult political situation, and Nixon met with Prime Minister Golda Meir, and they made a deal. And the deal was that the United States would stop pressing Israel about its nuclear weapons program, and in return, that Israel would never acknowledge publicly that it had nuclear weapons. So this policy has continued to this very day, and when Obama talks about Israel's not wanting to speculate about Israel's nuclear arsenal, everybody knows that this is that Israel has a large nuclear arsenal. Hans Blix last year said everybody knows Israel has about 200 nuclear weapons. It's not a secret.
John Steinbach, what about the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, not showing up at this largest gathering of world leaders since FDR that's hosted by the United States?
Well, the excuse was that if he went there, that he would be questioned by by Egypt and Turkey about the nuclear weapons program. But Israel has been challenged in every conceivable international venue by Turkey, Egypt, and many, many other nations in the world. This is nothing new. The world knows that Israel has nuclear weapons. Ehud Barak last year let loose that it has the nuclear weapons. We have incontrovertible evidence because Mordecai Vanunu, the nuclear technician, back in 1986, released several hundreds of photographs to the Sunday London Times. It was examined by Frank Barnaby and Ted Taylor, high-ranking Manhattan Project scientists. They concluded 25 years ago that Israel had 100 sophisticated nuclear weapons, and Frank Barnaby said they had the hydrogen bomb. So I think that it speaks for itself.
And John Steinbach, you write that Israel's nuclear monopoly in the region provides the impetus for other nations in the region the impetus for the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Explain that.
Well, let me give you an example. About 18 months ago, the Arab League had a meeting, and they made a public statement saying that if Israel ever publicly acknowledges that it has nuclear weapons, that the Arab League would be forced to develop its own nuclear weapons. And Mohammed al-Baradei, former head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, immediately took exception to that and took the Arab League to the woodshed. And he said, look, you know, everybody knows that Israel has nuclear weapons. We want Israel to acknowledge their nuclear arsenal. We want Israel to bring that to the table, and we want to proceed to negotiate a nuclear weapons-free treaty in the Middle East. And unless Israel acknowledges its program and comes to the table, that's not going to happen. And statements such as the Arab League made are not helpful. And I think we need to contrast this situation, this absurd situation. All the nations in the Middle East have signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran, which is technically not part of the Middle East, has also signed it. Iran, over the last 10 years, has undergone the most intensive scrutiny by the IAEA of any nation in the entire world. And in the meantime, on the basis that it might be trying to acquire nuclear weapons. In the meantime, you have Israel that not only has hundreds of nuclear weapons, but it has a very powerful, very sophisticated delivery system that includes submarines, missiles, and bombers.